For all our brilliance and promise as a species, we face destruction and strife. Strife diagnosed for millennia by great thinkers from Buddha to Becker as being due to our faulty thinking, mistaking illusion for reality. Our hard-won gift, our higher conceptual thinking, cost us our place in Eden, and the reality that we buy into is repeatedly hijacked by metaphors that we use to think in. That this high-order thinking is metaphorical in crucially important ways is well established by now, and metaphor is, by definition, correspondence between unequal things, using a familiar description or setting to help comprehend a unfamiliar one. As Nietzsche claimed in 1873, I think it was, conceptual thinking originates through our equating what is unequal. This is exactly capturing the paradox of thought which leads us astray and introduces inevitable incompleteness called ambiguity or error into the products of thought. This is characteristic of your conclusions and of my conclusions. It's the reality of our thinking that we urgently need to recognize to avoid the trap, the illusion of certainty. Once a concept is expressed in metaphor, thinking is easily run off the track into the ditch, pursuing the metaphor from where it is equal to where it isn't. Thus confusion as we try to understand and argue over the concepts. Of course, this doesn't mean that thinking is doomed to failure, or that one person's thinking is no better than another's, only that our expectations of reaching final truth is doomed to failure. We have to be happy with true enough. For example, the God concept in Western thought struggles to reconcile the human attributes of being all good and all powerful with the reality of evil. God in these terms either is not good enough or not powerful enough to prevent evil. And this leads to all sorts of theological contortions as we try to have our loving and powerful cake and eat it too. These are as fantastic as they are unsatisfactory, but they usually end up in some irrational cop-out of evoking God working in mysterious ways. Similarly, the dominant metaphor behind the Darwinian theory of evolution to explain the unassailable fact of evolution, that species do evolve from one another over time. But the metaphor is one of competitive survival of individuals, and this has spilled out into market theory and social theory and ethics, and has tended to sanctify individualistic competition as the engine of so-called progress. In fact, such heroes of our time as the father of economics Milton Friedman or Donald Trump represent the most ruthlessly competitive individualism, and governments make regulations and arrange taxpayer bailouts to allow them and their like a free hand. But this ignores, and this has a lot to do with the resistance that Darwinism still faces, it ignores the reality that we experience, the simple fact that cooperation and community are so active and important in our lives. It offends not only our intuitions about humanity, but increasingly so our scientific observations. Following the crashing and burning of ideas of Nobel laureate John Nash of Beautiful Mind fame, whose brilliance was built on theorizing about the consequences of the mistaken belief in competitive selfishness, see game theory and the prisoner's dilemma if you want a background on this. It is only recently that evolutionary theory has begun to struggle free from that tight grip of neo-Darwinism. Richard Dawkins, for example, has backed away from the hardline metaphor of the selfish gene in the sense of seeking its personal survival. And the discussion is now turning to the part played by altruism in the nurturing of groups and determining fitness for survival of its members. In passing, though, I have to mention I have little patience with the deniers of the theory of evolution on the grounds of Genesis. Many of their staunch opponents base their confidence on confusing the competitive theory with the fact of evolution. Evolution happens, agreed, but its mechanism is what constitutes the theory, and this has been developing since Darwin, and is currently developing from a simple competitive model of Darwin to a much more nuanced and cooperative model. It also opens the door to reconsider the unjustly maligned Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. These are just two examples of the sort of conceptual metaphors that lead our thinking astray. But just how important these are, and language itself is, in building our reality, is underestimated, I think. It is challenging, of course, to face the possibility that our reality is not as it seems, but it's a construct, and that the construct is reinforced by a non-material web of ideas passed on as communication, mostly in words, a sort of matrix that we are plugged into and that we resist being woken up from. Nothing I see or do or experience is free from some element of interpretation, be it the tree in my garden or my justification for feeling insulted or whatever. My perceptions will always be acted upon, structured by language, and my interpreted reality will be unique and relative. It won't be true, it'll just be true enough, to recall Wittgenstein. Mostly the metaphors of conceptual thinking arise in the material world of our embodied experience, but they are applied to non-material or abstract contexts, and they should be used with care. The classic film The Matrix suggested this, although probably understated it by having the source of the deception as an external reality, the machines, constructed the virtual reality, rather than the actual vehicle being our higher thinking, our language. The reality is that we live in a matrix even more intrinsic than the one that Morpheus and Neo discuss in this clip.
The matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself.
The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. But when you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we are trying to save. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it.